Good evening, traveler. Tonight, as you close your eyes and let the world around you grow quiet, I invite you to step back into history. Not into the noise of battle, not into the chaos of gunfire, but into the stillness that comes when stories from long ago echo softly across time. This is not a tale of glory shouted from the rooftops. It is a tale whispered on the waves, a story of courage and fate, carried by the restless waters of the Pacific. Our story begins with a single submarine, sleek, steel, and silent, the USS Wahoo. To many, it was just another boat in the vast United States Navy during the Second World War. But to those who followed its wake, it became something far more. A legend, a vessel whose daring patrols inspired hope and whose final mission would etch its name forever in the uncertain depths of the sea. Imagine for a moment the quiet hum of its engines, the dim red glow of the control room at night, sailors leaning over charts while the ocean pressed heavily against the hull. Above, the world was at war. Below, in the deep darkness, they were hunters, moving unseen. Every patrol was a gamble, every dive a test of both courage and luck. Yet for all the triumphs Wahoo had known, fate had marked one final chapter, a last patrol into the dangerous waters of the Sea of Japan, a mission from which she would never return. Tonight, as the firelight crackles softly beside you and your breathing grows calm, let us set sail together. Let us follow the USS Wahoo into the unknown, tracing the journey of her crew, her commander, and her final patrol into history's shadows. The year was 1943. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, a battlefield larger than any the world had ever known. Across this vast expanse, islands became fortresses, shipping routes became lifelines, and the sea itself was both shield and grave. Japan, though stretched thin, still held a mighty empire that spanned from the coasts of China to the jungles of Southeast Asia. Its war machine relied on one fragile thread: supply lines. Oil from the Dutch East Indies, rice from Burma, raw materials from occupied lands, all carried by convoys across the restless Pacific. Without them, factories would grind to a halt, armies would starve, and the empire would falter. The United States knew this well. It was here, in the silence of the deep, that submarines became America's sharpest blade. Unlike the great fleets that clashed at Midway or Coral Sea, these lone wolves fought an invisible war. They stalked convoys at night, waited beneath merchant ships by day, and struck with torpedoes that could sink thousands of tons of steel in seconds. By 1943, American submarines had begun to tilt the balance. Each sunken freighter meant fewer supplies reaching Japanese troops. Each destroyed tanker meant fewer gallons of oil for aircraft and warships. It was a war of attrition, waged one submarine at a time. And among these boats, one name began to stand out. A submarine that dared to enter waters others avoided. A commander unafraid of risk, whose patrols read like stories from an adventure novel. That submarine was the USS Wahoo. And under the hand of Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton, her reputation would grow into legend. Every submarine has its soul, and more often than not, that soul is the captain. For USS Wahoo, her spirit burned brightest under the command of one man, Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton. Morton was not the kind of officer who blended into the background. Broad-shouldered, with a booming laugh and an energy that filled a room, he carried himself with an air that sailors instantly respected, and sometimes feared. His men called him Mush, a nickname that began as a joke but stuck because it fit. Mush was bold, brash, and utterly unafraid of taking risks. Before Morton, Wahoo had been a troubled boat. Her patrols were disappointing, her reputation lackluster. The crew felt like they were just going through the motions of war, while other submarines were carving their names into history. When Morton took command in late 1942, that all changed overnight. He believed a submarine wasn't just a weapon of war. It was a predator. And predators didn't hide timidly in the shadows. They struck hard, fast and decisively. Morton drilled his crew relentlessly, demanding precision in every maneuver and discipline in every action. Mistakes weren't tolerated, but neither was mediocrity. If you served under Morton, you gave everything you had. At the same time, he wasn't a distant commander barking orders from above. He ate with his men, shared their dangers, and spoke to them plainly. When he said, "We're going to make Wahoo the most feared boat in the Pacific," they believed him. And soon the enemy would too. Morton's first patrols with Wahoo were unlike anything the Pacific had yet seen. He pushed the boat into narrow straits other captains avoided, surfaced boldly to attack with deck guns, and sometimes stayed in enemy waters far longer than was considered sane. To him, war wasn't about caution. It was about results, and results came quickly. In a matter of months, Wahoo went from an unremarkable submarine to one of the most celebrated in the Pacific Fleet. Her name began to spread in both American and Japanese reports. A legend was being born. The transformation of USS Wahoo under Commander Morton was nothing short of electrifying. What had once been a quiet, hesitant submarine became the talk of the fleet. Morton's aggressive style caught everyone's attention, from admirals in Pearl Harbor to sailors swapping stories in dockside taverns. On her early patrols, Wahoo struck with a ferocity that stunned even seasoned submariners. Morton believed in closing the distance, attacking so near to the enemy that there could be no mistake, no escape. Where others launched torpedoes from a cautious range, he preferred to get dangerously close, ensuring his shots tore into their targets. His gamble paid off. In January 1943, Wahoo attacked a Japanese convoy in the Bismarck Sea. Torpedoes streaked out from her tubes, and within moments, multiple freighters were left burning or sinking beneath the waves. The crew of Wahoo had never seen such destruction delivered so quickly. Their confidence soared, and with it, their trust in Morton grew unshakable. Word spread fast. In official reports, Morton's daring maneuvers became case studies. In hushed whispers, Japanese sailors began to dread a new name: Wahoo. Morton didn't just want victory, he wanted spectacle. He once surfaced in broad daylight to use Wahoo's deck gun on a convoy, the crew cheering as enemy ships scattered in confusion. It was reckless, almost insane, but it worked. The US Navy needed heroes in the Pacific, and Morton provided one. His patrols were splashed across newspapers back home, his reputation growing with each success. To the American public, he became a symbol of audacity, the fearless skipper striking deep into enemy waters. To his men, he was the embodiment of leadership, demanding, unyielding, but willing to share every risk he asked them to take. By mid-1943, Wahoo was a name carved into naval history. Other captains looked to Morton's tactics for inspiration, and the Japanese began altering their shipping routes out of fear of crossing his path. But with fame came expectation, and with expectation came pressure. Each patrol had to outdo the last. Each risk had to be greater, and the deeper Wahoo ventured into enemy waters, the closer she came to her fate. By the summer of 1943, Morton had already made Wahoo infamous. Yet for him, the Pacific wasn't enough. He set his sights on a place few American submarines dared to go in the Sea of Japan. This inland sea was the lifeblood of the Japanese war machine. Freighters carried coal, steel, and food between the islands and the Asian mainland. Tankers ferried vital fuel. But reaching those convoys required slipping through narrow straits choked with mines, patrol craft, and shallow waters where a submarine had little room to maneuver. Many in the Navy considered it suicide. Morton, however, believed it was the ultimate challenge. If he could carry the war into Japan's very backyard, it would send shockwaves across the empire. And Morton wasn't alone in his hunger. His executive officer, Richard O'Kane, shared the same fire. Both men knew it was dangerous, but to them, danger was opportunity. The plan was audacious. Wahoo would enter through the La Perouse Strait, prowl the enemy's inner sea, and cut off shipping where the Japanese thought they were safe. For weeks before departure, Morton drilled his men, running surfacing and diving exercises until every move became instinct. Torpedoes were inspected, re-inspected, and loaded with the care of men who knew they'd get only one chance. The crew felt the weight of the mission. Some were excited. The chance to strike so deep behind enemy lines was a point of pride. Others were anxious, knowing that once inside, escape might be impossible. But no one voiced doubt in front of Morton. His confidence was iron, and it radiated into the crew. On June 9, 1943, Wahoo slipped past the patrol lines and into the Sea of Japan. For the first time, an American submarine had penetrated these waters. The crew, cramped and sweating in silence, knew they had crossed a threshold few would dare to follow. The hunt was on, and the hunter was hungry. The Sea of Japan was alive with targets. Morton's instincts had been right. Freighters and tankers moved almost unguarded across its waters, believing the inland sea too secure for American submarines. Wahoo had slipped in unseen, and now the prey was everywhere. On June 12, 1943, the periscope revealed a fat Japanese freighter ploughing northward, smoke curling lazily from its stack. Morton's voice was calm but sharp. "Range, mark. Fire 1. Fire 2. The torpedoes hissed from their tubes, leaving streaks of white in the sea. Seconds later, thunder. The freighter lurched, black smoke billowing skyward as sailors scrambled in panic. The men of Wahoo watched through the scope as their target listed hard to port, then began its death roll. For the crew, the kill was intoxicating. The silence of the patrol room broke into cheers and claps on the back. But Morton didn't celebrate long. Set course. There'll be more. He knew the Japanese would now realize that their sanctuary was breached. Over the next days, Wahoo prowled the lanes like a wolf among sheep. A tanker went down in flames, its cargo of fuel exploding into a fireball that lit the night sky. Another freighter broke in two after a well-placed spread. Morton pushed the boat to its limits, attacking boldly often on the surface at night, his silhouette almost blending with the darkness. The crew began calling it the shootout in the backyard. Japanese escorts scrambled to respond, but they were uncoordinated and poorly trained for anti-submarine warfare. Depth charges rumbled, but Wahoo always slipped away, leaving destruction behind. News of the attack spread rapidly through Japanese ranks. Merchant sailors whispered of the devil submarine that struck in waters once thought untouchable. To the Americans back at Pearl Harbor, the reports that filtered in would become legend. Wahoo had carved its name into the very heart of Japan's lifeline. But Morton knew each attack brought greater risk. The Japanese were learning, adjusting, tightening their defenses, and every mile Wahoo sailed deeper into enemy waters meant one more step away from safety. The hunter had tasted victory. Now the question loomed, how long before the hunted turned? The Sea of Japan no longer felt like a quiet hunting ground. With every ship Wahoo sent to the bottom, the Japanese Navy grew more determined to crush her. Word of a rogue submarine prowling their secure waters was a humiliation they could not ignore. The retaliation came swiftly. Convoys that once sailed with only token escorts now bristled with destroyers and patrol craft. Planes patrolled the skies overhead, their shadows occasionally skimming across Wahoo's periscope lens. The once silent inland sea became an arena of tension. The hunter now sensed the prey turning to fight back. One morning, Morton tracked a convoy of tankers escorted by 2 destroyers. The temptation was too great to resist. Torpedoes were fired. A direct hit ignited one of the tankers, fire leaping skyward in a column of smoke. But before Wahoo could slip away, the destroyers charged. The sea exploded with depth charges. Each blast slammed through the submarine's steel hull, rattling bolts, darkening lights, and knocking sailors off their feet.
"Rig for depth charge,"
Morton barked, his calm voice steadying nerves that were fraying fast. They dove deeper into waters that left little room to maneuver. The explosions came closer, the pressure inside rising with each shudder of the hull. For hours the crew endured the pounding, sweat pouring in the stifling air, ears ringing with every detonation. They whispered silent prayers, each man wondering if this would be his grave. And yet Morton remained unshaken, issuing precise orders, guiding Wahoo like a surgeon threading a needle through danger. Finally, the charges drifted further away, the destroyers convinced they had destroyed their quarry. The silence afterward was almost unbearable, broken only by the hiss of air systems and the thundering heartbeats of men who had stared death in the face. Morton allowed only a moment of relief.
"They're learning," he said grimly.
It won't be this easy next time. The crew realized the truth.
Every victory tightened the noose around them.
The Sea of Japan was no longer just a hunting ground. It was becoming a trap. By the fall of 1943, the name USS Wahoo carried weight far beyond the Pacific. Newspapers back home celebrated her daring patrols, splashing headlines of "Submarine terrorizes Japanese shipping." Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton became a household name, his square jaw and confident grin often printed alongside stories of his victories. For the men aboard Wahoo, the fame was both a source of pride and a burden. They knew their patrols were different, more aggressive, more relentless than most. Morton and O'Kane demanded it, pushing the boat into waters where few dared to go. The crew believed in them, trusting that boldness was their best shield. Yet they also felt the weight of expectation pressing on every dive. The world expected Wahoo to keep winning. Onshore in Japan, the legend grew in darker tones. To merchants and sailors, Wahoo became a phantom that haunted the sea lanes. Survivors of sinking spoke of her torpedoes arriving from nowhere, of the shark-like shadow that struck without warning. Japanese propaganda labeled her the Devil Boat, a menace that had to be destroyed at any cost. Inside the submarine, the mood was more complicated. Pride mingled with exhaustion. The men were hardened now, their faces leaner, eyes shadowed from long patrols under the sea. Some whispered of the odds catching up to them. Each successful return to Pearl Harbor felt like stealing another chance at life. Yet, when the orders came to sail again, there was no hesitation. The sea had become their battlefield, and they would answer every call. Morton understood the risks, but he also believed in making history. "The harder we hit them," he told his men, "the shorter this war will be." His words carried conviction, but they also revealed a truth he kept close: every patrol might be their last. The legend of Wahoo was not just about victories at sea. It was about daring the impossible, and in daring, the line between triumph and tragedy grew razor-thin. In September 1943, as summer faded across the Pacific, the USS Wahoo prepared for what would be her most dangerous mission yet. She had already carved a reputation as the most feared submarine in the American fleet, but now her orders would take her deep into enemy waters. into the very heart of the Japanese supply lines in the Sea of Japan. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of U.S. submarine forces in the Pacific, respected Morton's aggressive style but also worried about its risks. "Mush fights like no one else," he confided to his staff, "but sometimes I wonder how many more chances the sea will give him." Still, Lockwood needed results. Japan's shipping arteries had to be severed, and no boat was better suited for the task than Wahoo. The assignment was brutally clear: penetrate the narrow straits leading into the Sea of Japan, hunt shipping relentlessly, and cripple Japan's inland supply routes. Few submarines had ever attempted such a patrol. The straits were heavily mined, patrolled by aircraft, and lined with destroyers that prowled like wolves. Entering was risky. Leaving alive was rarer still. Before departure, Morton gathered his men in the cramped wardroom. He looked each of them in the eye, his voice calm but unyielding. "This patrol won't be easy," he admitted. "They'll throw everything they have at us. But if we succeed, it will shorten the war. Every ship we sink in those waters means fewer supplies for their army, fewer bullets aimed at our boys." The crew listened in silence, absorbing both the gravity and the pride in his words. They had followed Morton before into the jaws of danger, and they would follow him again. For them, the mission was not just duty, it was destiny. On September 9, 1943, the USS Wahoo slipped out of Pearl Harbor, her crew waving one last time to the sunlit shore. Ahead lay the silent, shadowed waters of the Sea of Japan, and with it, the thin line between triumph and disappearance. The approach to the Sea of Japan was like threading a needle in the dark. To reach those waters, the USS Wahoo first had to slip through the narrow La Perouse Strait, a treacherous passage between Hokkaido and Sakhalin. The strait was laced with mines, swept regularly by Japanese patrol boats, and scouted by aircraft that flew relentless circuits. One wrong move meant disaster. Morton chose to attempt the passage at night, relying on moonlight glinting off the waves to outline enemy silhouettes. The crew stood tense at their stations, every sound amplified by the stillness of the sea. Sonar pings from patrolling destroyers echoed faintly through the hull, each one a chilling reminder of how exposed they were. At the periscope, Morton whispered orders, his face calm though his heart pounded. "All ahead slow. Keep her steady." The Wahoo crept forward like a shadow. Every man aboard knew that one drifting mine could rip open the steel hull and send them all to the ocean floor. Hours stretched like days. Then, just before dawn, they slipped through into the open waters of the Sea of Japan. Morton allowed himself a rare smile. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "we are the first American submarine to break into these waters. Now let's show them why they should have kept us out." Within hours, their gamble paid off. A Japanese cargo vessel was spotted on the horizon. The Wahoo stalked it silently, maneuvering into position.
"Fire one,"
Morton ordered. The torpedoes streaked forward, and moments later, a thunderous explosion split the dawn. Flames leapt skyward as the ship began to list. It was the first kill of the patrol, and proof that Morton's daring plan had worked. But victory carried a price. Radio operators soon picked up frantic Japanese transmissions. The enemy knew an American sub had breached their defenses. Morton understood immediately. The Wahoo was now the most hunted boat in the Sea of Japan. And yet, he pressed on. The sinking of the first freighter in the Sea of Japan sent shockwaves across the Japanese defense network. Within hours, patrol craft fanned out across the shipping lanes, aircraft circled overhead, and destroyers prowled the waters, their sonar beams probing the deep like invisible spears. The USS Wahoo, once predator, now risked becoming prey. For Morton and his crew, Every moment became a test of nerves. At periscope depth, they could hear the distant hum of propellers, sometimes faint, sometimes terrifyingly close. The submarine's air was thick with diesel fumes, sweat, and the metallic scent of tension. Every creak of the hull sounded like it might betray them. Then came the depth charges. A Japanese destroyer swept across their path, rolling explosives into the sea. The detonations thundered all around, shaking the boat violently. Mugs and tools clattered from shelves, gauges rattled, and men instinctively braced against the concussive shockwaves. Lights flickered as the submarine system strained under the pressure. "Hold her steady," Morton barked, gripping the chart table. His voice cut through the chaos, steady and unflinching. The crew obeyed, though their faces were pale, their bodies rigid with fear. The destroyer circled back again, dropping another barrage. The ocean roared and churned with violence, each explosion pressing the Wahoo deeper into the abyss. At last, silence. Only the low hum of their own motors remained. Slowly, carefully, Morton ordered the boat to creep away into deeper water.
Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours, until the sound of enemy screws faded into the distance.
A collective exhale swept through the sub. They had survived, this time. But Morton knew the reality. The Japanese were closing in, and the Wahoo could not remain hidden forever. He gathered his officers and laid out his resolve. "We didn't come here to hide. We came here to strike.
As long as we've got torpedoes in the tubes, we fight." It was reckless, bold, and undeniably in character.
The crew, hardened by weeks under his command, nodded. If this was to be their last patrol, then they would make it one the enemy would never forget. The Sea of Japan in late October was thick with traffic. Convoys of freighters and tankers, shielded by destroyers and patrol craft, carried the lifeblood of the Japanese war machine: coal, oil, food, and raw materials. To Morton, they were not ships but arteries feeding an enemy that had to be cut. "Convoy sighted," came the whisper from the forward periscope. In the grey dawn, the silhouettes of merchantmen lined the horizon, escorted by two destroyers weaving aggressively at the flanks. Morton's jaw set as he surveyed the formation. This was dangerous. It was also opportunity battle stations.
"Load forward tubes," he ordered.
His voice carried calm resolve, though the men knew how high the stakes were. They had only a handful of torpedoes left, each one precious. As the Wahoo crept closer, the ocean seemed to hold its breath. The convoy loomed larger, unaware of the hunter in its midst. Morton waited, timing the zigzag pattern of the lead freighter. His hands were steady, eyes locked on the periscope. Range, and 200 yards. Bearing, mark, fire 1, fire 2. The boat shuddered as compressed air expelled the torpedoes. Seconds stretched into eternity as the crew listened, silent, hearts pounding. Then, a thunderous explosion. One freighter erupted into flame, its back breaking as fire and smoke shot skyward.
A second detonation followed, water and steel twisting violently. "Direct hits," the torpedo officer confirmed, unable to hide his grin.
The control room briefly buzzed with relief, but Morton raised a hand. "Stay sharp."
"Escorts will be on us," he was right.
The destroyers surged forward, guns blazing, depth charges ready. The Wahoo dove deep, the hull groaning as she slipped beneath the waves.
Explosions echoed again, violent and relentless.
The submarine rocked as if the sea itself were trying to tear it apart. Still amid the chaos, the crew held firm. Morton had transformed them into a single, relentless unit, hunters willing to risk everything. In that moment, they weren't just striking ships. They were striking the Empire itself, waging war in the enemy's own backyard. The first depth charge rolled into the sea with a hollow splash. Seconds later, the ocean roared as it detonated, the shockwave hammering through the Wahoo's hull.
Lights flickered, loose tools clattered across the deck, and the smell of oil and sweat thickened in the stale air. "Hold her steady!"
Morton barked, gripping the periscope column as if to anchor the crew by his will alone. The Wahoo groaned, rivets straining under the assault. Another explosion cracked through the water.
Then another.
The destroyers above were relentless, circling like wolves, each blast closer than the last. The men braced against the metal walls, jaws clenched, knuckles white. A single hit to the pressure hull could mean instant death, but not one man flinched from his post. Depth. 250 feet and holding, reported the diving officer, voice taut but steady. The submarine sank deeper into the black, where sunlight could not follow, only pressure and silence broken by violence. Morton leaned close to his XO. "We'll ride it out. They can't stay on us forever." But even as he said it, he knew the enemy was determined. The Wahoo had embarrassed the Imperial Navy too many times. They wanted her gone. The charges kept coming, thundering across the hull. Each detonation rattled the crew's teeth and tested the seams of the boat. Somewhere aft, a pipe burst, spraying water until it was quickly stemmed. In the forward torpedo room, men whispered prayers between clenched teeth. Minutes stretched into hours. Sweat poured down faces despite the cold steel around them. Air grew thin, every breath heavier than the last. The silence between explosions was almost worse than the blasts themselves, anticipation gnawing at their nerves. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the rumble of destroyer screws began to fade. The enemy had pulled back, either believing the Wahoo destroyed or choosing to protect their remaining convoy. The submarine lay still in the abyss, battered but alive. Morton exhaled slowly. "Damage control, all stations report." His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed the weight of command, knowing this was only a reprieve.
Not salvation. The silence after the depth charge attack was suffocating.
Men moved in whispers, patching leaks, checking gauges, and coaxing the wounded submarine back into fighting trim. The Wahoo had survived the storm, but she bore scars, bent, piping, flickering lights, and the ominous creak of a hull pushed to its limits. Morton paced the control room, his mind sharpening under pressure. The convoy was still out there, steaming toward the safety of the Japanese coast. To let them slip away would mean fuel and ammunition reaching the enemy, prolonging the war. That was not the Wahoo's way. "How many fish left?" Morton asked, his voice cutting through the weary silence. "Just one, skipper," the torpedo officer replied grimly. "One shot left." The men exchanged glances. One torpedo. The last sting of a predator that had once struck fear into the Imperial Navy. Morton considered the risk. Their location was compromised, the enemy on high alert, and yet his decision was swift. "Set up the shot," he ordered. "We didn't come this far to leave with an empty tube." The crew sprang into motion, every man understanding the gravity of the moment. In the forward torpedo room, sailors loaded the final weapon with a reverence usually reserved for ceremony. It wasn't just steel and explosives, it was their last chance to strike, the final act of defiance against overwhelming odds. "Convoy dead ahead," came the whisper from sonar.
"Two destroyers screening." Morton steadied himself at the periscope.
Through the wavering lens of seawater, he spotted the dark outlines of enemy ships. He chose his target, a freighter heavy with supplies, its silhouette broad and vulnerable. Range.
"Set angle. Set!" The Wahoo glided into firing position, silent as a shadow in the deep.
Morton raised his hand, hesitated for a heartbeat, then brought it down. "Fire one." The torpedoes streaked into the darkness, leaving behind a trail of bubbles and the desperate hope of every man aboard. Seconds ticked by, each one heavier than the last. Then, a thunderous explosion split the sea. The freighter shuddered, fire and smoke erupting skyward. One final victory carved into history. The freighter's fiery death lit the night sky like a funeral pyre. For a fleeting moment, the men of the Wahoo allowed themselves a grim smile. Against all odds, their submarine had struck one last blow. But in war, victory often carried a price. The explosion had given away their position. Within minutes, the escorts converged, their searchlights piercing the sea, depth charges rolling into the water like relentless drums of doom. The Wahoo dove, deeper and deeper, her engines straining, her hull groaning against the crushing weight of the ocean. "Silent running," Morton ordered, his voice calm but edged with steel. The men obeyed, every movement measured, every breath controlled. They had lived this drill countless times, yet each man knew this might be the last. The charges came in waves, concussive blasts that shook the submarine to her core. Bulbs shattered, panels sparked, and seawater sprayed in through hairline fractures. Still the Wahoo held. Still, her crew clung to the desperate hope that the sea would once again protect them. But the ocean is an unforgiving ally.
One charge fell too close, hammering the stern. Alarms wailed.
The sub lurched violently, then began to list.
Men scrambled, fighting to stabilize her, but the sea was stronger.
In the control room, Morton stood at the periscope well, steady as the submarine that had carried him through so many battles began to fail around him. He did not speak of surrender. He did not speak of fear. His words were simple, resolute. Remember the Wahoo. The crew met his gaze, understanding that their story was ending here, in the black waters of the Sea of Japan. No one panicked. They were submariners, warriors of the silent service, and they had done their duty. As the hull gave way and the sea rushed in, the lights flickered, then died. In the darkness, the Wahoo slipped beneath the waves, taking her captain and crew with her into history. For years, their fate remained a mystery, whispered among sailors and remembered in silence. Only decades later would divers confirm the wreck lying quietly on the seabed, a steel tomb for 80 brave men. But legends do not die with steel. The Wahoo's patrols, her daring captain, and her final defiance live on, in the annals of naval history, in the lessons of submarine warfare,
and in the eternal roll call of heroes who never returned. The sea kept them.
The story remembers them,